What happens when two of television's most outspoken personalities clash in the most explosive confrontation late-night TV has ever witnessed? You won't believe what unfolds when radio legend Howard Stern sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to have it spiral into a career-threatening disaster that has the entire entertainment industry buzzing. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is the moment that shattered Colbert's carefully crafted image and exposed the darker side of late-night television that networks desperately try to hide from viewers. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two media giants go head-to-head in the most uncomfortable television moment of the year, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Was supposed to be business as usual last night. The audience filed in expecting the typical mix of political satire and celebrity banter that has become Colbert's trademark since taking over the Ed Sullivan Theater. Howard Stern, the undisputed king of shock radio, was scheduled to appear as the evening's main guest to promote his latest projects and reminisce about his legendary career. What the audience got instead was a masterclass in how quickly things can go sideways when two massive egos refuse to back down. From the moment Stern walked onto the set, something felt different. The usual pre-interview pleasantries seemed forced, and those paying close attention could see the tension brewing beneath the surface. Colbert, known for his meticulous preparation and control over every aspect of his show, appeared unusually agitated as Stern settled into the guest chair with his characteristic confidence. "Howard Stern, everyone," Colbert announced to thunderous applause, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for being here, Howard. I have to say, after all these years, it's surreal having you in this chair." Stern leaned back, sizing up his host with that penetrating stare that has intimidated countless interview subjects over the decades. "Yeah, well, Stephen, I've got to be honest with you. I wasn't sure I wanted to do this show. Your people had to convince me." The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Colbert's laugh came out slightly strained as he tried to maintain his composure. "Well, I'm glad they did. Though I have to ask, what was the hesitation about? Look, no offense, but you've changed since your Comedy Central days," Stern replied, his voice carrying that familiar edge that signals he's about to say something that will make people uncomfortable. "Back then, you had balls. You took real risks. Now, you're just another network puppet reading from a teleprompter, playing it safe for the suits upstairs." The audience grew noticeably quieter. This wasn't the playful back and forth they expected. Colbert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "That's interesting, Howard. I'd argue that having a platform like this gives me more opportunities to make an impact, not fewer." "Impact?" Stern scoffed, leaning forward in his chair. "What impact? You spent 4 years doing the same Trump jokes every other host was doing. Where's the originality? Where's the edge that made Stephen Colbert someone worth watching?" The criticism stung, and Colbert's mask began to slip. "Well, Howard, not all of us can hide behind satellite radio and shock value. Some of us have to actually entertain a broad audience every single night." "Hide behind satellite radio." Stern's voice rose slightly, and veteran Stern watchers knew that tone meant trouble. "I built my career by being honest with people, by talking about things other broadcasters were too scared to touch. You built yours by hiding behind a character, and now you can't even do that right." Colbert's hands gripped his note cards tighter. The audience could feel the temperature in the room dropping as the two men stared at each other across the desk. "You know what, Howard? I think you're projecting. Your whole career has been about saying outrageous things for attention. At least I try to add something meaningful to the conversation." "Meaningful?" Stern let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the theater. "You call pandering to your audience meaningful? You tell them exactly what they want to hear, night after night. You're not a comedian anymore, Stephen. You're a cheerleader." The insult landed like a physical blow. Colbert's professional demeanor cracked, and for a moment, the audience saw something they'd never witnessed before: their beloved host genuinely angry. That's rich, coming from someone whose idea of meaningful content is talking about his therapy sessions and celebrity gossip for 4 hours a day. "At least I'm honest about who I am," Stern shot back, his voice gaining intensity. "I don't pretend to be some moral authority while I'm cashing network checks and kissing ass to keep my time slot." The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing an elaborate bit or an actual breakdown in professional courtesy. Colbert's band leader, Jean-Baptiste, looked concerned from his position at the piano, while the show's producers could be seen frantically communicating with each other off camera. "You want to talk about honesty, Howard?" Colbert's voice carried a dangerous edge now. "Let's be honest about why you're really here. Your show is struggling. Satellite radio isn't what it used to be, and you need network television to stay relevant. So don't lecture me about integrity while you're sitting in my chair, on my show, promoting your brand." Stern's eyes flashed with genuine anger. "My show is struggling? At least I still have something to say. At least people tune in to hear Howard Stern, not some corporate-approved version of what Howard Stern used to be." "What I used to be." Colbert's composure was completely gone now. "What I used to be was someone doing a character on cable television. What I am now is the host of the most-watched late-night show on network TV. I'd say that's evolution, not selling out." "Most watched by who?" "Geriatrics who fell asleep with the TV on." Stern's voice dripped with contempt. "Your ratings are in the toilet, Stephen. Everyone knows it. The only reason CBS keeps you around is because they're too cheap to pay for someone who might actually bring in an audience under 60. The audience gasped audibly at the brutal assessment. Colbert's face flushed red as the carefully constructed facade of late-night civility completely crumbled. "You know what your problem is, Howard? You can't stand that someone else is successful without having to degrade themselves on radio. You built your career on shock value, and now that the world has moved past that, you're bitter." "Bitter?" Stern stood up slightly in his chair, his voice rising to a level that made even his most loyal fans nervous. "I'm not bitter, Stephen. I'm disgusted. Disgusted that someone with your talent chose to become a corporate mouthpiece instead of staying true to what made them special in the first place." The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the Ed Sullivan Theater could feel it. What had started as a routine celebrity interview was transforming into something much darker and more personal. Both men were breathing heavily, their faces flushed with anger and adrenaline. As the cameras continued rolling on what would become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history, the audience sat in stunned silence, unsure of what they were witnessing but unable to look away as two media titans prepared to tear each other apart on live television. Colbert tried to regain control of the situation, clearing his throat and shuffling his note cards with trembling hands. "Look, Howard, maybe we should what?" Stern interrupted, his voice cutting through the theater like a blade. "Pretend this is all just good fun? Smile for the cameras and act like everything's fine? That's exactly what I'm talking about, Stephen. You can't even handle a real conversation anymore." The host's face contorted with frustration and embarrassment. Being lectured on live television by his guest was bad enough, but having his professional competence questioned in front of his own audience was intolerable. "You want a real conversation, Howard? Fine. Let's talk about how you've spent the last decade becoming everything you used to mock. Remember when you used to make fun of celebrities who went to therapy and talked about their feelings? Now that's literally your entire show." Stern's expression darkened considerably. "At least when I talk about therapy, I'm being genuine. I'm not putting on an act for applause. You know what your problem is? You're still performing that character, even when you think you're being yourself." "That character was satire," Colbert snapped, his voice rising to match Stern's intensity. "It was commentary on the state of media and politics. What's your excuse for 30 years of juvenile humor and bathroom jokes?" "Juvenile?" Stern's laugh was harsh and mirthless. "You want to talk about juvenile? Let's talk about your obsession with musical theater and your desperate need to be liked by everyone. At least my audience knows what they're getting. Your audience doesn't even know who you really are because you don't know who you really are." The personal attack hit its mark. Colbert's hands clenched into fists on the desk as he struggled to maintain even a semblance of professional composure. "You don't know anything about me, Howard. You don't know what I've been through or what I've accomplished." "I know enough," Stern replied coldly. "I know you're terrified of being real with people. I know you hide behind scripts and prepared jokes because you're afraid of what might happen if you actually had to be spontaneous. That's not entertainment, Stephen. That's cowardice." The word cowardice hung in the air like a slap. The audience could feel the shift in energy as Colbert's remaining restraint began to crumble. His face was now visibly red, and his voice carried a tremor of barely controlled rage. Cowardice? You want to talk about cowardice? How about hiding behind a microphone for decades, insulting people who can't fight back? How about building a career on making people uncomfortable and then claiming it's some kind of art? People can fight back, Stern retorted, leaning forward aggressively. They can turn off the radio. They can change the channel. What they can't do is get their time back after watching you phone in another interview with some B-list celebrity, promoting their latest garbage. B-list celebrity. Colbert's voice cracked with indignation. That's what you think of my guests. These are accomplished actors, musicians, politicians, authors, accomplished at kissing your ass for 10 minutes while you lob them softball questions, Stern interrupted. When's the last time you challenged someone? When's the last time you asked a question that mattered? You've become everything wrong with modern media: safe, predictable, and utterly meaningless. The criticism struck at the core of Colbert's professional identity. His entire career had been built on the premise that he was different, that he was smarter and more incisive than his competitors. Having that reputation torn apart by someone of Stern's stature in front of his own audience was devastating. You know what, Howard? At least I don't have to rely on shock value to get attention. At least I don't have to degrade people to feel important. Degrade people? Stern's voice rose to a near shout. I elevate people by treating them like human beings instead of marketing opportunities. I have real conversations about real issues. You have choreographed publicity events designed to make everyone feel good about themselves. Real conversations? Colbert shot back, his own voice reaching dangerous levels. Real conversations don't involve asking actresses about their sex, lives, or making fun of people's appearances. That's not journalism, Howard. That's voyeurism. At least it's honest voyeurism, Stern replied without missing a beat. You're a voyeur too, Stephen. You're just dishonest about it. You want to peek into people's lives just as much as I do. But you're too scared to admit it, so you dress it up in pseudo-intellectual bullshit. The accusation was too much for Colbert to bear. His careful media training, his years of experience handling difficult situations, his entire professional persona, it all evaporated in an instant of pure fury. Pseudo-intellectual bullshit? That's what you call trying to have meaningful discussions about important issues? That's what you call actually caring about the state of the world? Important issues? Stern's voice dripped with sarcasm. Like what? Like reading tweets that make fun of politicians? Like doing the same tired impressions night after night? You're not changing anyone's mind, Stephen. You're not making anyone think. You're just giving people permission to feel superior to their political opponents. And what are you doing? Colbert demanded, his composure completely shattered now. What great service are you providing to society by talking about your personal life for 4 hours a day? At least my show has a purpose beyond self-indulgence. My show has the purpose of being honest, Stern replied, his tone becoming dangerously quiet. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you on your sanctimonious ass. The profanity sent a shock wave through the audience. Network television had rules about language, and Stern had just violated them spectacularly. But more than that, the personal nature of the attack had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Colbert's face went from red to white as the full impact of the insult registered. Sanctimonious? Colbert's voice was barely controlled now. You want to talk about sanctimonious? You sit there on your throne, judging everyone else's career choices while you've spent 30 years making money off of other people's misery. You've built an empire on cruelty, and you have the nerve to lecture me about integrity. Other people's misery. Stern stood up in his chair, towering over the desk. I've given people a voice. I've talked about things that mattered when no one else would. I've been honest about my failures and my problems. What have you done except kiss ass and collect paychecks? What have I done? Colbert was on his feet now too, facing Stern across the desk like two prize fighters ready to throw punches. I've entertained millions of people. I've provided commentary on important issues. I've tried to make the world a little bit better, instead of just tearing it down for profit. Entertained. Stern's laugh was cruel and mocking. You think what you do is entertainment? You're a sedative, Stephen. You're comfort food for people who don't want to think too hard. You're the media equivalent of a participation trophy. The final insult broke whatever restraint Colbert had left. His face twisted with rage as he realized that this confrontation had spiraled completely beyond his control and that millions of viewers were watching him lose his composure on live television. You know what, Howard? Colbert's voice was shaking. With fury now, all pretense of professionalism abandoned. You want to know what a participation trophy looks like? Look in the mirror. You've been coasting on your reputation for 20 years while actual talent passed you by. The only reason anyone still knows your name is because you won't shut up about how great you used to be. Stern's eyes blazed with an intensity that had intimidated corporate executives and celebrities for decades. Used to be? I'm still here. Stephen, I'm still relevant. I'm still drawing an audience that actually cares about what I have to say. Can you say the same? Or are you just collecting viewers who forgot to change the channel? Relevant. Colbert let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the now silent theater. You think hiding on satellite radio where nobody can regulate what you say makes you relevant? You're a relic, Howard. A museum piece from an era when shock value could substitute for actual talent. The audience watched in horrified fascination as their beloved late-night host transformed before their eyes. This wasn't the Stephen Colbert they knew, the quick-witted, charming entertainer who made them laugh every night. This was someone else entirely, someone consumed by rage and wounded pride. Museum piece. Stern's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouting. At least I'm not a corporate puppet dancing for network executives. At least I haven't sold my soul for a time slot and a steady paycheck. You used to have fire, Stephen. Now you're just ashes pretending to still burn. Fire. Colbert slammed his hand down on the desk with such force that his coffee mug jumped. You want to see fire? Here's some fire for you. Yura has been clinging to past glory while the world moves on without you. Your audience is dying off, literally dying off. And instead of evolving, you're sitting here trying to tear down people who actually adapted and grew. Adapted and grew? Stern stood up fully now, his imposing frame casting a shadow across the desk. You call becoming a neutered version of yourself growth? You call abandoning everything that made you special adaptation? You're not Stephen Colbert anymore. You're a Stephen Colbert impersonator, and not even a good one. The personal attack was too much. Colbert's last thread of self-control snapped completely. Get out, he said quietly, his voice trembling with rage. What? Stern asked, though he'd heard perfectly well. I said get out, Colbert shouted, pointing toward the exit. Get off my stage, get out of my theater, and take your pathetic, desperate need for attention with you. Stern stared at him for a long moment, and then something shifted in his expression. The anger was still there, but it was joined by something else, a cold satisfaction, as if this was exactly what he'd been hoping for. There he is, he said, quietly. There's the real Stephen Colbert. Too bad your audience had to see him this way. The real Stephen Colbert knows when to cut his losses, Colbert shot back, his voice hoarse from shouting. The real Stephen Colbert doesn't waste time with washed-up shock jocks who mistake cruelty for honesty. Washed up. Stern's smile was sharp and predatory. We'll see who's washed up when the clips of this interview go viral. We'll see how your network feels about their golden boy having a meltdown on live television. The threat hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Colbert realized with growing horror that Stern was right. This entire confrontation had been broadcast live to millions of viewers. Every insult, every loss of composure, every moment of unprofessional behavior had been captured for posterity. You planned this, Colbert said, the realization dawning on his face. You came here to start a fight. Stern's grin widened. I came here to see if there was anything left of the comedian I used to respect. Turns out there isn't. Just a scared little man playing dress-up in a late-night host costume. Security, Colbert called out, his voice cracking with desperation and rage. Get him out of here. But Stern was already moving, rising from his chair with theatrical slowness. Don't bother, he said, straightening his jacket. I've seen everything. I need to see here. He turned to face the stunned audience, many of whom were still processing what they'd just witnessed. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced in his most professional broadcaster voice, you've just seen the real Stephen Colbert. Not the character from Comedy Central, not the polished network host, the real man. I hope it was worth the price of admission. Get out. Colbert screamed again, his face purple with fury. Just get out. Stern walked slowly toward the exit, his movements deliberate and calculated. He paused at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time. You know what the saddest part is, Stephen? You actually had something once. You had a voice, you had a perspective, you had courage. But you traded it all away for safety and money. That's not evolution. That's extinction. I said get out. Colbert's voice broke on the words. Stern nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. I'm gone. But this conversation isn't over. Not by a long shot. With that, Howard Stern walked off the set of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, leaving behind a host whose carefully constructed public image lay in ruins and an audience that had witnessed one of the most explosive confrontations in television history. Colbert stood alone at his desk, breathing heavily, his hands shaking as the full magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. The theater was eerily quiet except for the sound of the exit door closing behind Stern with a definitive click that seemed to echo through the entire building. Jean-Baptiste, who had watched the entire confrontation in stunned silence, finally found his voice. Stephen, he called out tentatively, but Colbert didn't respond. He was staring at the empty guest chair where Stern had been sitting just moments before, as if trying to process how a routine promotional interview had transformed into a career-threatening disaster. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of his shell-shocked expression for broadcast to millions of viewers. Slowly, mechanically, Colbert turned to face the audience. His usual charm and quick wit had completely deserted him. "We'll be right back," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. The audience sat in stunned silence as the show cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. In the span of 20 minutes, two of the most prominent figures in American media had torn each other apart on live television, and everyone who witnessed it knew they had just seen something that would be talked about for years to come. Howard Stern had walked onto the set of The Late Show as a guest promoting his latest projects. He walked off having exposed what he claimed was the real Stephen Colbert, not the beloved comedian and talk show host, but an angry, bitter man whose professionalism crumbled under pressure. Whether that exposure was fair or calculated, whether it revealed truth or simply exploited weakness, one thing was certain. The confrontation between Howard Stern and Stephen Colbert would go down as one of the most uncomfortable and explosive moments in the history of late-night television. The Ed Sullivan Theater had hosted countless memorable performances over the decades, but nothing quite like this. As the commercial break continued and production assistants scrambled to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show, one question hung in the air. How do you come back from a meltdown that the entire world just watched unfold? The answer, it seemed, was that you don't. Some confrontations are too raw, too personal, and too public to simply move past. And as Howard Stern disappeared into the New York night, he left behind not just a shaken host and a stunned audience, but a moment that would define both men's legacies in ways neither of them could have anticipated when the interview began.